As Rana said, I'm Amelia Longo. For 4 years, I helped to build a local small business called Interactive Mechanics, where we build digital projects with museums and archives. And one of the things I'm most proud of is a fellowship program that I helped put together to support capacity building for diversity, equity, and inclusion in tech. I want to start by first of all thanking some of my colleagues. Christina Deemer co-founded this program with me and was an amazing advisor throughout. Mike Tedeschi, our boss, gave us the resources and the trust to really just run with this thing. And all of my colleagues at Interactive Mechanics, both the mentors that you'll hear a little bit about and the full staff that really brought their full selves to this as mentors, as helpers, and as critique as well. We were able to refine this program as we went thanks to that really honest feedback. I also want to thank some of the community organizations and social justice organizations that I've been working with, especially over this past year. As I think about how to expand and improve on this program, I've taken a lot of my learning from those worlds to bring here. So I'm thanking Bread and Roses Community Fund here in Philly, Camp Sojourner Girls Leadership Camp, Girls Rock Philly, Friends of the Free Library, and you'll see also a few quotes from Adrienne Marie Brown, who's an amazing activist and author throughout here that inspire some of the way I think about this. I'll also say I'm looking for work right now to do more of this, so if you are looking for ways to build processes and structures to support this work, let me know. Some of the main components of the fellowship program that were important to us, I can't go into too much detail about where these came from, but I'll say I spent a year doing research and interviews, and so each of these steps is particularly intentional, and I'm happy to answer questions later. It was for entry and junior level designers and developers. They were paired one-on-one with a staff mentor. It was a longer program, 9 months, and included paid part-time and remote work to allow fellows to balance their learning with the rest of their lives. It also focused on both hard and soft skill building. So while fellows were sort of centered on these projects that they defined themselves and were building out over the course of the year, they also were required to do things like write and speak about their work and had access to our full staff through what we called office hours. Briefly, some of the costs of the program, in part because I think it's particularly affordable given the benefits. It was an hour a week for the mentors. I, as the coordinator, spent about 2 hours a week over the course of the year designing and maintaining the program, and it ended up costing about $1,500 per fellow per year, and that covered stipends for our fellows, as well as our monthly roundtable speakers, monthly dinners, and a showcase at the end of the year, among some other costs. Some of the outcomes that we saw for fellows, first of all, they had a portfolio project that they created by the end of the year and all the learning that went behind that. They also had relationships that they built not only with our team at Interactive Mechanics, but also with some of the speakers that came in monthly. We had, in our first cohort, 2 developers were hired full-time within 3 months after they graduated from the program. In the second year, we had 2 developers actually hired during the program. One even moved out to California and still participated extra remotely from there. She did miss some dinners. And we've got a PANMA board member here today. I also describe this as building capacity for diversity, equity, and inclusion in tech because for us, it wasn't just about providing opportunities for the fellows, but creating learning experiences for ourselves as well. Some of the things that we got out of it were ways to improve our hiring and retention processes to be more inclusive. So we really got to prototype things like implicit bias training and blind application review in the fellowship and then migrate those over to our standard hiring processes. We also got some great publicity and client attention. The values that we were espousing as part of this program were really important to some of the clients that we worked with. We got some great press coverage and awards as well. And finally, it was helpful in doing some staff training with an eye towards management. So training our staff on how a hiring process might work and training them on mentorship as a step towards management as well. With all that said, I will say that I'm constantly trying to improve things. So despite those successes, I've got a few next steps I'm interested in exploring. One is improving internal communications. I think I was very focused on communicating with fellows and with the outside world, and there were some gaps in how we communicated with our team. One of those was that some of the mentors, while they were supposed to spend an hour a week, we saw fairly early on that some were spending way more time than that because they really wanted to do a good job and be helpful. So I'd love to figure out ways to better train staff, especially who are new to management or mentorship, to be able to manage that time and set some expectations there. We also had some conflict arise between the non-mentor staff and fellows and mentor staff about office hours. So how should communication work among those sort of three groups of people to have that happen? And I think that says to me that it would be great to establish a better process around that, but also it showed me the importance of having conflict resolution processes in place, even for a small, young business like ours. The second thing would be to redesign our staff training with a clearer social justice focus. I had been using Google's implicit bias training materials because they're free online and it's a great start, and it felt funny each time, and I finally realized that that was because Google is terrible at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so part of what I've been doing over this past year is exploring ways to apply some of the learning that I've done in those social justice communities to training like this. So while something like Camp Sojourner might not have an implicit bias training, it's baked into what they do, and I'd love to find ways to incorporate that into small business environments. Finally, expanding to non-technical roles. As I said, we focused on developers and designers, and in some ways it's hard to imagine taking a project-based learning experience like that and applying it to a role like marketing or project management or business development. But given how undervalued those non-technical roles tend to be in the tech community, I think it's important to spend some extra time examining them and figuring out how you can make the case to actually support those more. This was actually an idea that came up as part of our staff feedback when we did a retrospective. Thank you very much. I've got some other resources that go more in depth about this program. I'm also happy to talk, and I've got Adrienne Marie Brown's book right here. I highly recommend that one. Thank you.
Any questions at all? Any, you want to ask about something more in general?
I'd love to hear something, Amelia, about the selection process, which I know went some thought into.
Sure. So I'll say that, thoughts on the selection process. We created a blind application, which is essentially, we had folks fill out a form rather than submitting things like resumes or cover letters. All personal information was removed so that we couldn't tell race, class, gender, education, those kinds of things. We were very intentional about how we created some of those questions so that we were making sure that the job description or the fellowship description matched the questions that we were asking, and that those questions matched what we were evaluating based on. It's kind of amazing to see in a lot of traditional hiring practices how those three things can be very different. We also were really intentional about the outreach that we did, so reaching out not only to the tech community, but building relationships in outside of the tech community and in certain targeted demographic areas in tech. So there are some amazing groups like The Item, which supports tech and entrepreneurs of color, and just figuring out who are the populations that tend to be marginalized in tech and how can we reach out to them. Selection process involved our full staff team, and it sort of changed over the 2 years that we did it, but essentially everyone on staff sort of went through and reviewed. Mentors were paired one-on-one with the fellows, so they sort of had a final say in selection. I think we brought in 2 or 3 fellows to interview, or potential fellows to interview for each mentor. Yeah, that's sort of the bulk of the process there.